Welcome to Nature Calls, conversations from the Hudson Valley. Our team's goal is to present science-based information about gardening and all things nature in New York's Hudson Valley. Hosts Jean and Tim, along with team members
Teresa, Linda, and Annie,
are master gardener volunteers for New York's Columbia and Greene counties. So if you're interested in gardening or nature, or nuggets of information about what's happening outside your door, settle in. Enjoy the conversation. Whatever the season, we have something to say.
Hi, I'm Tim Kennelty.
And I'm Jean Thomas.
And welcome to Nature Calls, conversations from the Hudson Valley. We're on our road trip to Ithaca, New York at Cornell University, talking to all kinds of awesome experts. Jean, who are we talking to today?
Today we have Todd Bittner, who is the Natural Areas Director at Cornell Botanic Gardens at Cornell University. And our topic is lawn alternatives.
Excellent. Everybody wants to know about lawn alternatives.
It's a big thing. But before we get into that, let's hear more about you. Now, we could usually read off a whole bunch of things that you've accomplished and stuff like that, but we like to ask the interviewee what he considers his highlights of his career. So let's hear your version.
Oh, that's a big question. I don't know, but thanks for asking me to be here. I'm thrilled to be talking about native lawns and the work that the Cornell Botanic Gardens has been doing. So I have a passion for natural areas conservation. And so that's kind of the core area of my focus. And we manage 3,600 acres of the university's outdoor classrooms. I had the privilege of having some amazing mentors over the years that helped me to learn and find that passion and channel it. So my job here at Cornell University allows me to mentor the next generation of environmental conservation stewards and students. And so we try to bring them into the work that we do, whatever it is, from natural areas conservation, habitat restoration, the native lawn, you name it. So that's the core area of focus that and kind of where I draw my inspiration and passion and commitment to education, environmental education, and conservation.
So that's a huge, we were talking about this before we got on, a huge job. What is, you said 3,600 acres. When you say 3,600 acres of Cornell Botanic Gardens, does that include some of the common areas of the university? We were walking around and seeing, admiring all these plants. Are there common areas too?
So we have
included
on campus. We have 700 acres. It includes some pretty iconic spaces: Cascadilla Gorge, Fall Creek Gorge, Beebe Lake, the Mundy Wildflower Garden. Off campus, we have 24 natural areas that encompass all the different natural community types and rare plant habitats in the central Finger Lakes region. So we have old growth forests, bogs, fens, wetlands, riparian habitats, you name it, because we need to have a portfolio of all those plant community types for the educational classes and research that we support here at Cornell University.
So if there's a class on a bog, they go to your bog that you're managing?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
Wish I had a bog.
Yeah, bogs are very cool.
We have actually 4.
Oh, wow. And they're natural bogs that were here that were just happened to be here? It's not like you built a bog,
That's right. That's right. One site has 3 that are in different successional stages of their age. So we have an open water bog, a floating sphagnum mat bog, and a bog that has succeeded into a forest. And then at a separate site, we also have another floating sphagnum mat bog.
So is this all open to the public or no?
All but 5 of our areas are open to the public. We have 31 miles worth of hiking trails that we manage and maintain for public access. The 5 sites that aren't open to the public are restricted to academic use only because they're just too sensitive to, they'll get loved to death if they were open to the public.
That's always the two-edged sword, right? You want people to be able to see natural areas, but you also don't want people to be tracking in like weed seeds and things like that, right?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
And I'm just curious, with all that acreage, like how big's your staff?
We're 33 here at the Botanic Gardens, including our horticulturalists and our admin support staff. I have about 7 that are dedicated to natural areas work.
Huh, interesting.
No, I want to go back to my original question. How did you get here? What's your background?
By training, I'm a plant ecologist. I kind of had the aha moment when I saw a savanna restoration in Illinois, where I'm from, and realized that the prairie state had this dominant plant community that only 0.007% of it remains.
Wow.
And that includes the savannas, and that habitat restoration was a thing, right, to help conserve biodiversity. And that hooked me into doing conservation and becoming a plant ecologist, and ultimately then got into doing that conservation work in Illinois as a heritage biologist with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources before this job here at Cornell University drew me to upstate New York.
Huh?
You got the best job titles.
You said you had the best job in the world, right, before we got on.
Oh, well, I don't want to rub it in.
Oh, we won't tell anyone else. Don't worry.
I do have a great job.
No, it sounds like a great job.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
And we're talking today about lawn alternatives, which everybody seems to be talking about. I'm certainly doing experimenting in my garden. Tell me how you would even define lawn alternatives, because I know there's all this noise out there about things like eco lawns and things like that, but that's not really what you're talking about. You're talking about something else, right?
Right. Yeah, there's now, and I love these things. I love no mow may, right? Yeah. And people that want to have more than a monoculture of turf or have native plants in their yard. And so, yeah, we have essentially a designed plant community that's comprised principally of native plants. And we're at almost 15 years now since the inception of that. And the premise of it is, I think, started from the idea of how people have been embracing native plants in their backyard landscapes, native trees, native shrubs, native wildflower gardens, bordering. And then you get to the edge of that, and it is this very, very damaging environmentally turf grass lawn. So nature doesn't like monocultures. And to work against nature, to force a monoculture to happen, you have to put in all kinds of energy inputs to it. Gas for lawnmowers with CO2 emissions exacerbating climate change. Pesticides, again, and pollute our groundwater to keep the bugs from causing problems. To fertilizers that then run off into our wetlands that create algal blooms and noxious conditions that deprive oxygen for freshwater fish and things like that. They have all these negative environmental impacts, but also it's a huge time suck for people and a lot of work to force monoculture onto nature. And it has almost no upside as environmental benefits in terms of providing habitat for wildlife, pollinators that are in decline right now. People are now very aware of things like the monarch butterfly populations declining, and that we need to support pollinators. And this is a strategy towards doing that. So knowing those problems were out there, we had wanted to change that paradigm. And that's where the idea for the native lawn, the genesis of it came from. But I want to give credit to our horticulturalist, Chrissy Boys, that really had the inspiration for how to do it. And that was observations that she made out in natural areas and the edges of natural areas in upstate New York, where she discovered, for her own discovery, a grass called Danthonia spicata, poverty oats grass, that was growing in very lightly disturbed areas, and it looked like a lawn to her. And so these are areas under power lines that were going through otherwise intact forests that would not be mowed maybe but once a year, along roadsides, seasonally used roadsides and state forests, old cemeteries that weren't being maintained like a turf grass lawn, and found Danthonia there in a number of places. And that kind of was the light bulb moment that, hey, you need a dominant grass species in order to come up with a native lawn. And this is promising.
And did this happen 15 years ago? This started 15 years ago that she made this discovery?
Yes.
Because it seems like really prescient that, people are talking about this now, but 15 years ago, you really forward thinking in contemplating what you could replace a lawn with or potentially replace a lawn with.
Well, some of these environmental problems have been with us for a very long time. Mm. And so I don't know that it was that forward looking, but we recognized that the dire need to come up with a new paradigm. And it really has caught on and caught people's attention now.
Right now, the whole lawn thing where everybody wants to transfer their lawn into a meadow or and whatever, and they're just shifting everything around so that it's going to be no maintenance. And of course, there's no such thing. When you start a meadow, you've brought a whole bunch of maintenance into your life. How big an area is this that you're working in?
About a quarter acre.
Okay, so you've got this quarter acre. 15 years ago, you decide to make it into a natural lawn with the goal of it being accessible so you could walk on it and it would take care of itself, basically. And you had that base grass. And then how do you decide what else goes in with it?
Yeah. So talking about project goals is kind of important because that's the foundation for this, right? So I already touched on a few of them, right? No pesticides, no watering. Water use for turf grass lawns in the U.S. is a huge environmental cost. No pesticides, very low carbon emissions, good for the environment and biodiversity and so on. But from a lawn perspective, aesthetic, right? They can tolerate moderate trampling and that ultimately low maintenance, because otherwise none of those things are going to check enough of the boxes. Now, I should be clear, the establishment phase is different than when it's established and then the maintenance phase. So right now, our maintenance phase, we only do about a few hours a year for its maintenance. The cost really comes on the upfront side to do it right. But after that, it's a fraction of what typical maintenance is for turf grass lawn. In the U.S., the average homeowner spends over 70 hours a year mowing their lawn. And if you do the averages, not everybody in the U.S. has a lawn. It means that most people are spending way more than 70 hours a year. So 3 sounds great, or 5, or whatever it is.
What about herbivores? What about deer and rabbits? Because, I mean, we have so much deer pressure.
Right.
Did the plants have to be deer-proof too?
Well, so let me answer what else was in the native lawn, plus how the animals have responded to it. So the idea was to come up with a core set of species, and it would be grasses that were low-growing, that were drought-tolerant, and that would kind of behave well and not take over the area, interspersed with other forbs that would be growing and flowering at different times of the year so it could provide habitat across the seasons. So Xanthonia spicata and then closely related Xanthonia compressa, both poverty oak grasses, form the matrix of the native lawn. And then we included a few others like Grassus scabra, ticklegrass, a couple sedges, one Carex pennsylvanica, Pennsylvania sedge. So those were the grass and grass-like species. And along with that, then we included some of these other forbs mentioned. And those were, a lot of them were early growing, low growing species because we wanted them not to be able to be mowed once or twice a year and people could walk across this. So you don't want really tall plants. So we use things like pussy toes, Antonaria neglecta, Antonaria plantaginefolia, wild strawberry, Fragaria virginiana, bluets, penstemon, hirsutus, hairy beardstongue, blue-eyed grass, Syncyrinchium angustifolium. And that was what went into the original mix, a few other species as well. And what we found over time was that some other native grasses and native forbs that were in the vicinity started to grow spontaneously inside the native lawn. And most of them were beneficial. And it included some non-native turf weeds and other kind of weeds. And we set it as original goal, 85% native plant cover, because there wasn't an expectation you would have it all just be native species. And actually, 15 years later, that's exactly what we have, is about 15.
So some poor grad student had to go in there and count those, didn't he?
Did you lose some of those originals?
We did
some of them not do as well?
And that was part of what was interesting about seeing how it changed over time. And it really is driven by plant competition, which most native plant communities are, and they're dynamic systems that can change around the environmental conditions. So we did lose some things. We put in columbine and geranium, and they didn't like it. But we gained asters and violets that weren't in our original mix either. Cool. And the first couple of years, I'd say the biggest problems we had were some woody seedlings that would get established. And, once a year mowing isn't going to get rid of them. So those did have to get removed by hand. And Canada thistle, which can grow rhizominously, and you don't want a lawn with sticky, prickly
well, maybe you
plants. Well, we do have cactus that we added, native opuntia.
I saw that.
That we added as a fun thing. It is native in New York, but that's the part of the lawn we don't advise people to walk on. So we did have a few species that we intentionally tried to remove, but a lot of the turf weeds there are being outcompeted or kept at a very diminutive state, and so aren't really causing problems for us.
So there's a good system that's supporting, they're all supporting each other and crowding out the bad guys. Now, as a gardener, my question is, what kind of light and soil conditions do you have? And does this mix work everywhere? Do you have separate subsets of plants for different kinds of areas?
Right now, it was one kind of habitat type as a pilot. And most of the areas that we saw Danthonia growing in were on the drier side of things. And if you think about it, you also want to have plants that can tolerate drier conditions if you don't want to water them. So it is a slight southern aspect to it, otherwise open, but it does have some trees and a little bit of shade. So different times of the day, it does get shaded. In order to also be conducive to native plants, we wanted it to be less fertile. And it's the same thing, the idea of fertilizing your lawn to keep all these turf species and also turf weeds growing is adding extra nutrients into the system. So if you want to create a system that isn't conducive for them, you want it to be less fertile. So we actually took away the top organic layer of the pilot site because it was rich organic turf sod. And we amended that soil with just a bit of sand to make it a little bit more well-drained and a little bit more nutrient poor. Native plants do just fine in those kinds of conditions. So that was us setting the stage to tip the scales towards benefiting the native species that didn't need highly fertile sites, that didn't need really wet areas, and to make it as least conducive for the turf weeds that do want those kinds of conditions. So that was what went into a bit of the site selection and then the site preparation to set the stage for what would work best for our native lawn mix and least beneficial for the turf species.
And some of the plants you mentioned, like I love hairy beardstongue. It's such a great plant because it's so tough, and pussy toes and wild strawberry. And I know that people have been kind of experimenting with them as kind of native ground cover, but they were also super good pollinator plants and host plants. So have you done any kind of research into what the pollinator count is, or is the biodiversity in your area as opposed to what it was if it was just turf in the past?
Great question. Yeah, that was one of our original goals, that would have some benefit to wildlife. And knowing about the New York Times story that was forthcoming and just came out this September, we had previously some qualitative sense that it was, met the goal, but we wanted it to be quantitative. So along with the interns that counted all the plants, we had, with the support for some phenomenal students and faculty in the entomology group here at Cornell, came out and we did an insect survey.
Wow, that's great.
And it was, so it's not a before and after, which is a good way to do it, but you can also just do let's go find a turf grass area, right, to compare the insect biodiversity to our native lawn. And we picked the turf grass that was immediately next to, so not just something that was way far away. So it might even be artificially high because it was so close to the native lawn. But we had 4 times the number of insect families in the native lawn than we had in the turf grass that was right next to it. But not just in numbers. What really blew me away was the complexity of what those species are doing, right? We think of insects and then we kind of jump right to pollinators, but we have insects that are decomposers. We have insects that are herbivores. We have insects that are parasitoids and predators on other things. And we had that entire suite of niches that insects occupy in the native lawn, and it was very limited in the turf grass. So we felt fairly confident that we exceeded our biodiversity goal of the native lawn.
And that's amazing, right? Because it's one thing to say that and you're hypothesize that if you're going to be having all these plants, you're going to have more biodiversity. But to basically prove it is pretty amazing, right? I mean, it's you must have felt pretty good about that too when you got those results.
It has become an unqualified success in my book. But there was another wildlife question in there a little while ago about rabbits and deer and things like that. And although we like supporting wildlife habitat, we don't need to do that for deer. We actually have the opposite problem, and it creates a huge issue for us, right? Because if we're trying to conserve plant biodiversity, we're trying to make sure that plants can move across the landscape in response to climate change, we need to be able to have plants that can complete their life cycles and set seed and create another generation. And right now that's not happening because of deer populations are so excessive. And it's even worse in the Hudson than it is here, but it's terrible here as well. So I know there's a lot of frustrated gardeners out there with deer. The good news is that deer don't like grasses or sedges, grass-like species, which constitute, the majority of the biodiversity that's in the native lawn. And so that part isn't going to be an issue for them. We are mowing the native lawn either once or twice a year. It's kind of up to us how comfortable you are, how high you want it to grow. I don't advise it being mowed less than 6 inches high, because otherwise the plants are going to be adversely affected. But many of them are mowed and then they'll still flower. They'll just be more diminutive, be little bonsai asters and goldenrods. And so if deer are out there doing the same thing, then they're essentially doing that kind of mowing. So we really haven't seen a negative impact from the deer on the native lawn like we've seen in some of our other habitats.
And maybe I'm remembering incorrectly, but I think that I remember that one of your goals was to be able to do this from seed and to not have to plant plugs too. So has there been a run on poverty oatgrass seed? I mean, is somebody made a lot of money on that? Or what's happening?
I have gotten a lot of requests of where can I find this?
I'll bet.
And it is a great question. It is a bit of a chicken and the egg kind of a situation when it comes to plant material and commercial trade. The nurseries aren't going to provide it unless they know that there's a demand, and the demand isn't there unless people know that they want it. So that was part of the idea of the promotion of it. But we are working with other conservation partners and nurseries, private industry, through the Northeast Native Seed Network, something that was just started earlier this year, to try to better connect seed suppliers, right? Like the Botanic Gardens or other organizations that have seed that could be collected, plants that are there in their natural environment, with the commercial side of things. Because, we hadn't really worked together in any significant way in the past. And to try to get some more of these kinds of species into commercial production to meet that need. And the overall goal is not just to put those species into production, but to put local provenance of those species into production. So there's Danthonia from the Hudson Valley available in the Hudson Valley or in Long Island. And there's Danthonia in Ithaca, New York, that's available for Central Finger Lakes region or for, somewhere else in Massachusetts.
I mean, it's your dream to see the seed kit for the Hudson Valley for this particular program where I could go out and buy, like, I want to do that same thing, and I want to buy this kit that has these seeds for these plants and they grow and they're successful. Is that where you want to go, or is that wrong?
I think that would be fantastic, right? Because we need to do a paradigm shift in terms of what we're doing. There's something like 40 million acres of turfgrass lawns in the United States.
Yuck.
It's the size of Wisconsin.
Well, I guess that's
so we need to make a change if we're going to conserve biodiversity in this planet. And if part of that can be the native lawn, well, you can't expect that to happen unless you make it as convenient as possible.
Well,
for
I guess,
people.
that's my question is, like, you've sold us, but we're you're preaching to the choir and probably some of the people listening too. But, like, how do you make that paradigm shift? You make it convenient, but also you kind of have to convince those people who, I know lots of people who, and I'm not going to name names of relatives of mine, who would say, like, oh, I want to have that lawn because whatever historical, cultural thing that you look out and you see that green lawn, and it may not look exactly the same. How do you make that paradigm shift besides making it convenient?
Right. That is a huge part of it. So given the interest that has been generated from our native lawn here, we're going to do Native Lawn 2.0.
Oh, love that.
I'm open to better suggestions for a name from your listeners.
I like that.
I like it too.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we're going to be working on that next spring. And our intent is to actually videotape it and then make that available to people so that they then have the how-to. Because it's one thing to say, go buy this, right? It's another then to be like, how do you do all of the, X, Y, and Z? And so we plan to do that. And then we're working on trying to increase availability for some of these species in the trade, right? In commercial trade. And we're looking at this being an opportunity for not just commercial nurseries, right? But organic farmers and being able to sell this at the farmers market. And, opportunities for entrepreneurialism to start up a business and to not just expect that one sector of the commercial industry is able to kind of meet this need. And it seems like it's certainly viable to approach it that way.
So what if you asked all the master gardeners in the state to do their own plot at their master gardener office as a test site to be a display for people in that county?
Yeah, it certainly could look that way.
We're on board, right?
Well, I want to get back to the nuts and bolts here. This garden is specifically suited for a dry, partly sunny area. I have a garden with that kind of area, and I also have this kind of different soil, different everything. I'm thinking that it would be really cool to have like 5 or 6 different types, because if you've got so many different environments, like if that's the one you've got and none of my garden fits that kind of requirement, I can't do it. So is that coming along?
Well, it's like when
so
you see
slow.
the seed mixes and one is shady, damp, and one is sunny, dry. I mean, it's a lot to ask.
Because it's gorgeous, but if I don't have the terrain...
You're asking Todd the hard question.
I am. He's heard it before.
I'll share the idea of actually pitching the native lawn to Margaret Roach. Came in seeing an article that she published a year ago in the spring about a shade garden that had native plant, and it was the dominant there was wild strawberry, and it can grow in that kind of part shade condition. So Danthonia has a broader amplitude in terms of where it can grow, and it can grow in some moisture conditions as well. But we hadn't tried to do what you're doing yet, which is come up with how could we adapt this yet to 5 or 6 different places. I think it's a great idea. I would certainly consider pursuing it. But right now, there's already enough interest with the one that we've come up with.
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
And there's a lot of sunny, dry areas in the state with a lot of lawn that we could probably start with, right?
And they're the areas that require more irrigation and more care and environmental impacts than some of these other areas as well. I'm an advocate for the a la carte approach, where people can convert their lawns to native woodland species, right, in those conditions, and to be really thoughtful about where you need the kids to play and, want to do the barbecue and things like that. Personally, for my shady backyard, I'm working on getting it to become a native lawn, but I also tolerate, not just tolerate white clover, I love white clover as part of my turf grass, and there's plantain in there, and there's violets, and there's strawberries, and they're all growing happily, without me using pesticides and mowing it 6 to 8 inches high. And that's one way to also approach that, where it doesn't have to be the native lawn solves every lawn
So
issue.
it's a piece of the solution.
Certainly.
Well, and just because you see success from some of these plants, like I planted wild strawberry in a big area, and it's half shade and half sun, and it's doing incredibly well, and it's kind of taking over, which I love. And that's just one component, but you could do that, right? You could mix and match it. That's what you're talking about with a la carte, right?
Exactly. And to be clear, none of what we're talking about is a meadow, right? Where you mow it once a year, and it is dominated mostly by tall plants. A lot of things like Canada goldenrod, they can be like 6 feet tall, etc. That isn't the paradigm that we're talking about here.
Although you could do, that is an alternative to a lawn. Certainly, it's just not what you're talking.
Right. It is an alternative to meet a lot of other goals, but not necessarily a walkable, moderately trampled kind of a lawn.
That's what my yard is. I've got a meadow that I let loose because I've got an area that's standing water all spring. I've got another pseudo meadow with specifics laid out in rows like a labyrinth. And I've got several places I'm going to put this little baby.
Well, I know wild strawberry and hairy penstemon are trampleable because the workmen just came to fix my fence and they trampled all over it and it still looks good. So I have the proof in the pudding.
It is amazing. Native plants are very resilient and, they have evolved in this highly competitive environment, and you just get the right plants in the right environment for a long enough period of time and they're highly resilient.
How is this garden doing in this climate with the heavy intense rains and then the ridiculous heat waves? This summer in particular must have been a test. So it's well established, so obviously it's going to be resistant to a lot of challenges. But are you seeing any response that they're going to be making to climate changing?
As I said, it's kind of a dynamic system, so it changes, but it does seem to be fairly stable now and ebbs and flows as the environmental conditions may change year over year. So, for example, 2016, we had a really significant drought, and all the turf grass on campus was completely brown, and the native lawn was still green.
Really? Wow, that's interesting.
And so it did very well there. And it is interesting, too, because the Danthonia is a cool season grass, and so those do best and grow the most in the spring and the fall and kind of lay dormant a bit during the summer. Well, it was still green, even though that was the case. And so it did very well in that condition. And this year, it looks fantastic. It actually loved all the extra water that
I was going to say, do you need to mow a couple extra times?
Not to be simplistic, but maybe that's your selling point when we talk about culture shifts and changes. If you basically say it's an evergreen lawn even through the droughts, that's a pretty positive thing for those people who want a green lawn to look out on and say, look at my big property.
Yeah, I love that. But, in addition to that, it has seasonal change like our other natural areas do. So it looks different across the year, and I think it's beautiful on all the different seasons. Like right now, all the different asters are in flower. All the leaves are here and there on the lawn. I think it's about 8 inches tall at the moment, and it looks very inviting.
Like a quilt?
This seems like it's kind of a dynamic thing. So, I hope you'll come back and join us and tell us how it's going a year from now.
Especially 2.0.
Yeah, we want to hear about 2.0.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
This seems like a pretty hopeful thing. Tell us what makes you hopeful in your job and daily life with all the bad stuff going on in the world.
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I'll say reading through the comments from the New York Times story gave me a lot of hope as well, because I got to read from people sharing what they're doing to change their own personal lawn paradigm from all across the U.S. So knowing that there's this growing movement of people that are very aware of the negative things that are happening out there, and that we need to give nature a helping hand. And I definitely got a big boost when I saw how many people were trying to affect positive change in their own little ways.
It's like you're not alone out there,
Exactly.
right? Oh, that's great.
Especially with 15 years under your belt and wondering who else is out there in the wilderness. That's awesome.
Well, thank you so much. This has been so interesting. We love the story, but we really love talking to you about it too and hearing all about it.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
That concludes another episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. We would like to thank Sandra Powers and Devin Connolly from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties for production support. And a special thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. You can find links to any of the topics mentioned in this episode at our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org. Comments and suggestions for future topics may be directed to us at columbiagreenmgb@cornell.edu or on the CCE Master Gardener Volunteers of Columbia and Greene Counties Facebook page. For more information about Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties, visit our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org or visit us in Hudson or in Acra. Cornell Cooperative Extension provides equal programming and employment opportunities